Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, we're going to have Vicki Granado on. She is from Energy Transfer Partners. They're the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline. Recently, they put out a release talking about how much in taxes this company is paying to the state of North Dakota right now. But also, they were just in the headlines recently. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was just questioning the CEO of Wells Fargo, Tim Sloan, in front of a congressional hearing, and she brought up the Dakota Access Pipeline. So I wanted to talk to them a little bit, just get a feel for how they're handling it. You know, we're just about 3 years removed from those protests. So just wanted to check in on how, you know, they're seeing the world after their pipeline suddenly became this, I don't want to say iconic. I think iconic's the wrong word for it, but this sort of, I don't know, avatar for political angst. Anyway, that interview coming up. But before we get there, I wanted to talk about this shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand. Now, I don't have a lot to add to, you know, the questions about the shooting itself that other people haven't expressed, and probably more eloquently than I could. It's awful. It's terrible. You know, the victims were innocent. They didn't deserve this. It's monstrous. Every time this happens, it's monstrous. You know, there's the usual knee-jerk reaction, you know, push towards gun control. I think that's just become sort of rote after mass shootings. I will tell you that I generally don't think it's wise to do policy making amidst the emotions of a tragedy in general. And listen, New Zealand is not that violent a place. That's a country that's got a lot of guns, and this doesn't happen very often over there, which might indicate that the idea that the presence of guns are the reason why this sort of things happens is, well, it's a little bit silly. I think it's more likely that the mass shooting has become the medium in which the disaffected, the angry, the hateful, the bigoted, the extreme want to work. But I don't really want to talk about all that. What's interesting is what happened online. See, one of the shooters live streamed the video, or the shooter, I should say, live streamed the video, and you know, it was on the internet, and there was a push to take it down, right? You know, Facebook was taking it down. As a matter of fact, let me read. This is from the Washington Post. I quote: Facebook said that it removed 1.5 million videos of footage from the shooting rampage at two mosques in Christchurch within 24 hours of the attack, underscoring the massive game of whack-a-mole social media giants have to play with even the most high-profile problematic content on their platforms. In a statement, Mia Garlick, spokeswoman for Facebook New Zealand, said that the company continues to, quote, work around the clock to remove violating content from our site using a combination of technology and people. Of the 1.5 million videos of the massacre filmed by a body-worn camera on the perpetrator, almost in the style of a video game, 1.2 million were blocked at upload. So basically what's happening is, you know, this video is out there. The criminal himself put the video out there, and this is starting to happen more and more. In fact, I remember not so long ago, there was a newscaster that was shot by a man, and the video ended up being live, on the internet. I think he was live streaming it when it happened. The Philando Castile shooting happened live on Facebook. I mean, it was inevitable. I mean, you put smartphones in everybody's hands and you give them the ability to broadcast whatever it is they're doing, and some of those people are going to broadcast some awful, awful things sometimes. But what's interesting is there were clearly a lot of people who are trying to upload these videos to the various services like Facebook, like Twitter, like YouTube. They were trying to put it out there, and, you know, not even these services themselves could stop it. I mean, you're talking about an army of people who are putting this content on the internet. And the ability of even the tech giants themselves to keep this content off their own platform is limited. But here's a question for you. Should we be trying to block this sort of content? Now, I say this, I don't particularly want to see the video. I think I think it would be very, very hard for me to watch. I think most normal people would feel that way. And yet, the video represents the truth of what happened. whenever we've seen ugly footage of things, war, crimes in our media for a long time. The news media shows us dead bodies sometimes. The news media shows us gruesome footage. Hollywood shows us fictional violence all the time. Now, obviously, fictional violence is in a different category from real violence happening to real people getting hurt, real people getting killed. I understand that. But I just, at some point, when we're working this hard and you've got this many people who are trying to get the content out there, and you have a concerted effort between government and these massive corporations that are standing astride our communications mediums these days, you start to wonder, is this a good thing that we're doing? I mean, is it a good thing that we've just sort of had these elites, these government elites, these business elites, these corporate elites coming together and deciding for us what it is we're not allowed to see? Now, again, maybe this sort of content isn't the best example. I can understand a lot of you not feeling very sympathetic towards my argument if I'm saying, if I'm trying to defend the right to upload video recorded by an extremist murderer of his crimes, apparently to try to titillate an audience or to, manufacture, spread, enhance his own infamy. I can understand why, people would argue, hey, we don't want to facilitate that. But I just can't get around, again, that this is the truth of what happened. It is what happened, and I start to worry when we argue about what the public ought to be protected from. I worry about what it is we're trying to protect from. And in some ways, I think the debate against the debate over guns, which is obviously something that's also going on around the Christchurch shooting. I think the debate over guns is another example of, perhaps in another context of what I'm talking about. Now, people who want to ban guns after a mass shooting like this argue that the existence of guns create crimes. Now, the rebuttal from that, from those of us who support gun rights, is that criminals use guns as a tool. The gun is not the inspiration for the crime. I don't think that this man in New Zealand, I'm not going to use his name, but this man in New Zealand, I don't think that he attacked a mosque. I don't think he, or mosques. I don't think he attacked innocent Muslim people because he had a gun. He did so because he was beholden of a hateful ideology, right? I don't know. I can't speak to all of his motivations. I think we can say for sure he had some that were deeply rooted in bigotry and hatred, for certain. But he didn't do it because he had access to a gun. Now, the argument would go that, he obviously, the shooter, this murderer, this disgusting human being shot this video, in order to enhance his own infamy, in order to, raise his own profile, in order to, he was trying to play to an audience. And I can understand the impulse. Hey, how about we not give him that audience? Okay, that makes sense. But the other part of it is, I guess if other people see this, people are afraid that this is going to create more of these shootings. And, I think in some ways that's true to a point. I think that people who are disaffected, people who are thinking about using violence in some ways, people who are already extremists might be inspired to use the mass shooting as their medium if they hear about it in the news media, if they're exposed to it, right? I mean, it becomes almost a sort of copycat thing. I think sometimes, like serial killers, would copycat each other. I was just listening to a podcast about the Zodiac killers, and I didn't know this. There was another Zodiac killer in New York who, had multiple victims, who, patterned himself, even called himself the Zodiac, was a 100% copycat of the killer who was based in California. So that happens. I mean, that's a real thing. But the thing is that most of us are not killers, right? I mean, if I gave you a gun, would you be more likely to commit a crime with it? I think your answer would probably be no, you're not a criminal. Having a gun is not going to make you any more likely to commit a crime. So let me ask you this. If you saw video of a mass shooting happening, would you be more likely to commit a mass shooting or perhaps another act of violence? I think the answer is, again, probably no. Almost certainly no. Because it's not just that video. It's not just the one catalyst, right? I mean, I think somebody else has to have things going on with them in order to want to do something like that, right? I think you already have to be bigoted and hateful and radicalized or mentally ill or whatever the nexus of maladies is that makes you want to go out and perpetrate an act of violence like that. You already have to have that going on before you get something like a gun that you could use as a tool to perpetrate the violence, or before maybe you see somebody else commit an act of violence that you're going to emulate. I don't think that somebody robs a bank because they learned that somebody else once robbed a bank, or they watched on the nightly news surveillance video of somebody robbing a bank. I don't think somebody's more likely to commit a mass shooting because they saw somebody else commit a mass shooting, or at least become violent. So, I don't know. I struggle with it. Again, I don't want to see the video, and I can understand the victims don't want people to see the videos. I mean, could you imagine if those were one of your loved ones was hurt in this shooting or killed in this shooting, and now suddenly, the video of them dying, the video of them suffering, the video of their last terrified, awful moments on earth is all over internet with millions and millions of people watching, some of whom are awful people who are probably enjoying it in some ways. Yes, I can understand that would be terrible. That would compound the misery even more so than what you're already facing. I get it. But it's still the truth. And it's still what happened. And once upon a time, we didn't shy away, right? I mean, we have entire, generations of war reporters, who covered, the conflicts in the Middle East, the Gulf Wars, the Vietnam, Korea, World War I, World War II. And they thought that it was important to show Americans the grim realities of what that war looked like. The dead bodies, the explosions. It was important. It was a story to tell. And, well, I think the video out of Christchurch is a story too. And it's an ugly one. It's a disturbing one. And right-thinking people don't want to look at it, and yet it's still the truth. And sometimes maybe we shouldn't shy away from the truth. And also, I don't know that I want our new corporate overlords at Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, Google, getting cozy with the government when it comes to, rapid response to suppressing content on the internet. Because today it's controversial, violent, ugly, horrible footage that most of us agree, is not something most of us want to watch. But what if one day it's merely content that's politically controversial? We have a debate in this country all the time about hate speech, right? I mean, there's an organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center that creates a hate list, and they're being sued by people who think that they were wrongly put on this hate list, and as a result, suffered economic harm, reputational harm, because they were identified as a hate group and they were censored in some way or deplatformed in some way. I mean, that's happening all the time. So what happens if now, we get used to, Facebook and YouTube and everything, deploying a sort of rapid response when somebody deems a bit of content too vile for the general public to consume. And now, the government and the corporations are working in concert to take this content off the internet. Accuse me, if you will, of trafficking in conspiracy theories, but I'm not sure we're that far removed from exactly that sort of thing. Our communications mediums are becoming monolithic. The government is becoming monolithic. And I would even say, even beyond that, we have this new populist hive mind out there that, takes umbrage, takes offense to just about anything. And if they put their sights on you, if they decide that you're too controversial, you're too, in their minds, hateful or bigoted or what have you, to express a point of view, and now all of a sudden internet service providers aren't sending traffic to your website, and all of a sudden YouTube won't put your video up, and Facebook won't allow you to post, and Twitter won't allow you to post, and your hosting service who maybe hosts your website, takes you off. Now what do you do? We are a country where the First Amendment applies to everybody, even people who have points of view that most of us don't like. The ACLU once defended the Ku Klux Klan marching down the street, holding a rally. What was it, Skokie, Illinois? I think that was where it was. Very famous case. The ACLU defended them. You know why? Because the Ku Klux Klan, even hateful people have First Amendment rights too. Now, I realize that a lot of times we're talking about private platforms, but I believe that the First Amendment is something more than just a law. I think it's also an ideal that we should all aspire to. Even if maybe the law, the actual law of the First Amendment from the Constitution doesn't apply to a given situation because you're talking about a private platform, I think we should still aspire to what it is. I would tell you that I would rather risk having ugly, extremist, horrible content on the internet than to run the risk the other way of having small committees of government and corporate elites deciding for the rest of us what we're allowed to see. That's it for today's rant. My interview with Vicki Granado coming up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Vicki Granado joins me. She is the Vice President for Communications for Energy Transfer Partners. Now, ETP is the company that was behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, which probably needs no introduction to you because not so long ago, the pipeline project was making national headlines. It was the subject of protests, often very violent, very ugly protests, clashes with law enforcement. But today, Energy Transfer Partners is operating the pipeline. It is moving a lot of oil out of North Dakota to market. It's been a real boon to North Dakota's economies. I think state officials would tell you that the pipeline is providing, a lot of tax revenue. As a matter of fact, speaking of tax revenue, Dakota Access Pipeline just put out a press release detailing the amount of taxes that they've been paying. North Dakota sales taxes, for instance, from 2015 to 2018, over $11.2 million. North Dakota property ad valorem taxes, 2015 to 2018, another $12.7 million. Estimated ad valorem taxes paid to the state of North Dakota in 2019. Obviously, we're not done with 2019, so this is an estimate for the rest of the coming year. Over $6.7 million. The bulk of a lot of those tax revenues are going to western North Dakota counties. And then on top of that, the company has made, all sorts of donations, over $5.2 million in donations to, various, like the 4-H Foundation, the FFA Foundation, the North Dakota Historical Society Foundation, North Dakota Peace Officers Association, $5.2 million in donations, and then also $15 million to the state of North Dakota to cover the costs of protests. The tax numbers are obviously the big one. I mean, that's the ongoing number. And Vicki, first of all, why tell us about this? Why put out a press release about these numbers?
Well, it's something throughout the project during the planning and the construction of the project that we always talked about. We view ourselves as a good community partner and a good business partner locally and to the state of North Dakota. So, we consider ourselves to be that in all of the communities that we operate. And when you talk about it for several years, then you need to show that you actually have followed through. So the ad valorem taxes are something that is an annual tax payment. And, will continue over the life of the pipeline, which, is decades and decades. So, we're happy to show people that, we're following through on the commitments that we made.
So the Dakota Access Pipeline continues to be this sort of avatar, this political avatar. And I don't think you folks, obviously never intended it. I think you guys just wanted to build a pipeline and move some oil and go about your business. But like it or not, the pipeline has become this political avatar for what a lot of people think is something that's wrong. Do you feel like, for instance, just recently, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was questioning the CEO of Wells Fargo, Tim Sloan, and during that questioning, basically asked him, why did your company finance this pipeline that everybody knows is this terrible thing? She questioned him pretty hard. I mean, that sort of stuff is still going on. Is that part of the reason why you put out some of these numbers to say, hey, look at the other side of this, look at the commerce that we're driving, look at the taxes that we're paying, this is a good thing?
Well, it's not, but it doesn't hurt for us to communicate this information. But it's not why we put this out. Energy Transfer has 83,000 miles of pipeline in 38 states. So this is something that we talk about in all of the states in which we do business. We give to the communities across that entire 83,000 mile spectrum. So this is something that we do just as a part of how we work with the communities. The other thing that people, need to realize is there are, I think, like 2.5 million miles of pipeline in this country. So, while we're proud of the Dakota Access Pipeline and we're proud of the project and we're happy that we're flowing domestically produced crude through our pipeline, this is something that's been the fabric of our country for a very long time.
So today the pipeline is moving how much oil?
What we just recently announced is that, we have been flowing in between 500 and 520,000 barrels. The capacity of the system is 570,000 barrels. So we did recently announce that we have commitments to take it to the full system capacity of 570,000 barrels per day.
That's amazing. Commitments. Now, does all of that come from North Dakota, or does it come from sort of regionally, North Dakota, Montana? I mean, because North Dakota's, we're, obviously it varies from month to month, but we're, well over about 1 million barrels a day. But if you get up to 570,000 barrels a day, you're talking about roughly, and maybe even a little more than half of all of North Dakota's oil output going through your pipeline.
And that's true. Yep. And that's one of the things that we said all along, is that when this pipeline was completed, which it is now, of course, that we would be transporting at least half of all of the crude produced in North Dakota. So we only, it's just coming from, 5 tanks, I'm going to call them, but we're sort of gathering systems. We have 5 different terminals where we gather the crude from North Dakota, and then from there it gets put directly into the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Well, that's pretty remarkable. What sort of, when I hear oil producers talk about it, they're saying that this has literally changed the market for North Dakota oil. We've always struggled with something of a transportation bottleneck for a long time. A lot of the oil was going on rail, and that had drawbacks to it. Cost being one, safety being another. Now we're putting a lot of it. They say that this has changed the market for oil in North Dakota. Do you have any estimates on that? Can you tell us? Because I've heard people even saying it's increased the value of a barrel of oil in North Dakota by dollars per barrel. Is that true?
So, we've heard the same thing. We've heard it from, elected officials there in North Dakota, and we've heard it from Ron Ness, industry people there, and then from the producers themselves. I don't have specific numbers, but we have those same conversations.
As this goes on, we're seeing a lot of the advocacy against pipelines continue. In our region, the Line 3 pipeline just across the border in neighboring Minnesota to the east is they're promising protests against that pipeline, which is owned by Enbridge and is actually an existing pipeline. They're trying to replace it. Protesters are vowing to make that into another Dakota Access Pipeline, which I think gets back to my point at the beginning of this interview, which is that the Dakota Access Pipeline has become this sort of political symbol, this sort of political shorthand to express a certain idea. Has that changed how your company does business? Have you guys? How are you reacting to that?
We're just keeping, our head down and running the business the way that we've always run it. And yes, we are building a number of other pipelines around the country. It is something that the game has changed to some degree to, how pipeline projects are planned and permitted and constructed. But at the end of the day, our country needs pipelines, and we're happy to be building a number of those.
When you're talking about keeping your head down and going about your business, but obviously you've almost had to account for these protests and a lot of even what I would describe as political delays, from politicians. That's certainly, I think, what Enbridge is up against in Minnesota right now with Governor Walz and Governor Dayton before. But, have you had to take that into account as just like a cost of doing business, that these projects are going to take longer because of political delays?
Sure. You're definitely all of the companies are looking at their timelines and their costs associated with projects now differently than before. If many of the protesters, they know they're not necessarily going to stop the projects, but, unfortunately for them, a win is if they can, delay them and cost companies more money, which, unfortunately it ends up hurting everybody all along the chain.
Do you feel like, going forward, there's something we can do? At a certain point, we live in a democratic society, and sometimes democracy is just hard, right? Because you have to let people have their say, and that's not easy. You and I support these projects generally. We want to build pipelines, but other people don't, and they have their First Amendment rights too. And I don't want to deny anybody, the right to free speech. That's not what I'm asking. I guess my question for you is there something that we can do policy-wise to maybe make sure that we have a vigorous and robust debate about pipelines, but that we also don't have unnecessary delays maybe from people acting in bad faith?
We have a system now that offers robust discussion on pipelines, and we have for years. It, depends on the different types of pipelines are planned and permitted differently. The Dakota Access Pipeline, for example, was permitted state by state. So there was, I can't even tell you the countless public meetings that we held almost in every county along, the route in all 4 states. If it's like a natural gas pipeline that is a FERC, regulated project, then again, there are public meetings all along the route that we hold, and then there are public meetings that the regulators hold. So we have a very robust environment now that offers that. And you're right, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same opinion as ours. Everybody has a right to express it. They just have to make sure they're expressing it according to the laws of the land.
Yeah, I agree with that. Vicki, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. A favor, if you will, on Stitcher and on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever the heck they're calling it these days, you're allowed to rate and review podcasts. And if you would rate and or review this podcast, just leave your honest rating, your honest review. If you don't like the podcast, hey, so be it. If you do like it, that's good too. If you would leave those ratings, those reviews go a long way towards promoting this podcast's popularity, naming it as a recommended podcast for other people to download. So if you would do those or check the podcasting, but whatever you're listening, so whatever service you're listening to this on, if there's a way for you to rate or review the podcast, gosh, I'd sure appreciate it if you did that. If you want to send in questions or comments or feedback, or if you're having any trouble subscribing to this podcast or listening or in any way, you can email rob@sayanythingblog.com, and I'd be happy to help you out or take your questions or respond to your feedback, what have you. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.